Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is Culturally Determined, and I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade. And my guest today is Osita Nwanevu. Osita, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Osita Nwanevu, and I'm a staff writer for Slate covering politics. Usually, but I guess not today. A little kinder.
Well, the subject today is a mix of politics and pop culture. I mean, pop culture became politics in a way in the past couple of years. The subject is Kanye West and his recent tweets. You wrote a piece called Why Kanye's Rightward Turn Matters. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a friend, and she said that after Trump retweeted Kanye, it seemed like reality had become like a farcical, like French satirical comedy or something, where nothing makes sense anymore. Why do you think we should pay attention to this story?
Well, there are multiple events seemingly every week that feel that way, right? Like when you asked me to come on, you said, we should better hurry up before something else bizarre happens and take everyone's attention off of it. So, it's not surprising that something like this would happen, but it's still kind of remarkable. I mean, the take that I had in the piece was not so much about Kanye West. I mean, your mileage may vary on the extent to which you think celebrities matter in general, or the extent to which you think Kanye matters in particular. But what I said in the piece was that I think it's remarkable that this sort of growing blob on the cultural right has gotten big enough that somebody like Kanye West, who is not too in tune with politics, or not really very into political commentary usually, would notice. Somebody like Candace Owens of Turning Point USA. Like, that seems like a big deal. And after the Candace Owens thing, he began tweeting videos from Scott Adams, who apparently praised him after he praised Candace. There was a video today that he shot, and people saw that one of the tabs open on his computers was a video of Jordan Peterson. I think that this matters.
I'm just imagining Kanye like being told to like straighten up his room.
Yeah, exactly.
And take control of his life.
He's bound to have an order of 12 rules for life on the way. But it's one thing for Kanye to like meet with Donald Trump and like say things about George Bush, right? And to understand and know about politics on that kind of macro level. It's quite another thing for him to know like who Candace Owens is, and to figure out who Jordan Peterson is and start watching his videos, or to know who Scott Adams is. And so I think what we're seeing in real time now with Kanye is what's happening for a lot of not famous people in this country. Like you are turned on to a particular new voice on the right, and then you find yourself going further and further down the rabbit hole of this sort of culture war infrastructure that's cropped up over the past couple of years. So that was what the piece was about. It was saying that this weird event is a marker potentially of how big all of these new voices have gotten. I think that there's is a subculture that's growing, and it's going to stay with us for a long time. Even if it doesn't look like the alt-right or the cultural right is going to gain actual political power, it's still going to exist as a cultural force that influences a lot of people, most of whom are not going to be Kanye West.
So there's a lot of threads here. So there's the should we pay attention to what celebrities do? Is with a heavy heart that I regret to say that the celebrities are at it again. There's that attitude, but then there's also, our president is Donald Trump, who was a businessman but really was a celebrity, and that's how he gained higher office was through the power of his celebrity. So it seems like we should pay attention to these people.
Yeah.
And then there's Kanye as his own figure. He is a unique cultural figure. He has had some kind of notable run-in with each of the last three presidents, which is kind of noteworthy. Like what other person had some thing that everyone knows about interaction with George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump? So it's the George Bush doesn't care about black people on the Katrina telethon, and Obama calling him a jackass after he stormed the stage while Taylor Swift was accepting an award, and his current flirtation with Trump. So that's just weird. I don't quite know what to make of it. And then there's like Kanye Trump parallels, which a lot of people point this out, but like they're both narcissists. They are both kind of impulsive and childlike, and they are married to beautiful women, and they, think they're the center of the world, basically, and are the greatest thing ever. And then there's what you wrote this piece kind of after the initial wave of tweets, before the ones that Trump retweeted when he was just talking about this woman, Candace Owens. And I think it is interesting. You have to wonder how he found out about her to begin with, and I guess that's a victory for, this slice of the right. The splitting the alt-right into like the alt-right and the alt-light, as some people have done, makes sense to me. So this is more like the alt-light, not the explicitly racist white nationalist part of the alt-right, but more like young, very conservative people who are challenging the conservative status quo. And I mean, Charlie Kirk, who's the guy who runs Turning Points USA, this group that ostensibly is to like combat liberalism on college campuses and support college conservatives. He was, I think a lot of people who I follow on Twitter, at least, like consider him to be a joke. They did this, they have like, chapters on college campuses, and they did this stunt where, Kent State, where a student was dressed in a diaper, and this became a laughingstock. And Charlie Kirk is someone who I think most people on the left see as a joke, but
rightfully, I think.
Yeah, but somehow his compatriot Candace Owens got her content in front of one of the biggest superstars in the world.
Apparently, what happened was there was an event at UCLA, I think last week, maybe it was Friday, where Black Lives Matter staged a protest, and I think there were articles about that. Right before Kanye started tweeting about her. I think that's the theory people have been saying, which I think speaks to the extent to which these campus controversies get a lot of press. So I think that might have been why. But yeah, like
so Black Lives Matter protested an event that she was having on campus.
Yeah, I think they interrupted her at a Turning Point USA event at UCLA, and there was a bubble of news, and Kanye West apparently picked up on it. Again, like, there's no reason why Kanye West should be following like campus conservative controversies involving Turning Point USA, which speaks to I think how successful they've been at like commanding the media's attention. I don't know, it's as far as the parallels between Trump and Kanye are concerned. I mean, Van Newkirk wrote something I think very smart in The Atlantic about this. And I think they're essentially like the same kind of person, right? Like they both have this image of themselves where they're self-made people. They're both geniuses in their own minds. And they care very much about the image that's presented of them in the world. Kanye, it's very important to Kanye, as we see now in his most recent tweets, to be seen as somebody who speaks his mind and speaks freely and is a free thinker and a creative person. Trump is the same way. He doesn't want to really show any vulnerabilities intellectually. Like every idea that he has is a great idea. Everything that happens that's good is somehow the result of him saying something,
right?
Even if it didn't actually happen policy-wise, So
one recent example of that was Trump saying that he came up with the idea to call the tax bill tax cut.
Yeah, exactly. Like he invented the idea.
Wow, tax cut! What a great idea!
Right. But this speaks to, I think, a fundamental, I don't really believe in personality types, but if they do exist, Kanye West and Donald Trump are the same personality type.
He said, "We are both dragon energy. He is my brother."
We are both exactly. There you go. So so I think that's one angle to look at it. But I'm fundamentally more interested in trying to gauge the extent to which the alt-right, I guess we could call it, is growing. Because there have been a lot of articles published recently about how the alt-right, like the proper white nationalist section of people, has sort of started dying off since Charlottesville. People were scared away. People started losing their jobs because they were photographed with this thing. And there was a lot of infighting amongst different groups after the event about how things were managed. And there seems to be something imploding within the white nationalist community. And that seems to be crashing. But I think it's very important that people don't look at that and say that, like, this broader movement we've seen on the right, like the Milo Yiannopoulos and the Jordan Petersons, Gamergate, the men's rights movement, all of this, like, it's important to separate in terms of their potential longevity, the far right, the white nationalist groups, and the broader sort of anti-multiculturalism, anti-political correctness right, which has its hooks into, I think, the culture in a big way now. And I think overlaps more easily with established conservative institutions that might be willing to prop them up than the alt-right does. That's what Turning Point USA is. I mean, this is a mainstream group that, you know, stages events aimed at calling attention to supposed liberal indoctrination on campuses. It's taken in millions of dollars. It's trying to swing campus elections to elect conservative candidates, but it's gotten, you know, it's a group that has a lot of the same grievances about multiculturalism as groups further to the right of it. And Candace Owens is somebody who has said, you know, racism is not really a live force in American politics and policy. It's something that Black people need to get over. You know, there's this cultural dependency. Like that starts bleeding into points further right, I think, pretty easily. And yet it's still a mainstream enough discourse that it's attached to establishment Republican, establishment conservative infrastructure. So even if the further right white nationalists start, you know, imploding, that doesn't necessarily mean that people like Candace, groups like Turning Point, people like Jordan Peterson, etc., that doesn't mean that they too are going to, you know, start their fall as well, if anything. Again, Kanye getting to a point where he sees some of this stuff. It illustrates, like, it's a group and movement and a blob that still has a lot of legs.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, there was kind of a fear when people started paying attention to the alt-right that, like, you know, young white guys who got angry about something that happened with video games and political correctness would, like, have, like, a hop, skip, and a jump into white nationalism. I don't know if that's quite happening, or maybe that couldn't really happen, because you really need to be far out on the extreme to actually be a white nationalist.
Yeah.
But you can see you think political correctness is stupid as a college student, and then you start reading Charlie Kirk if he writes things, I don't know. You read his tweets, and then you move, like, a couple steps further. Where do you see Peterson in this? I confess to I tried to ignore him, like, for months and months and months, and be like, I don't want to learn who this guy is, please, God. Yeah. And then I was seeing more and more, and then finally I was like, I guess I have to pay attention to this guy a little bit. I read the takedown that was published in Current Affairs. That was brilliantly done. We'll link to it. Which kind of just said he was more or less a intellectual, like, flim-flam salesman and didn't really have anything behind him. That's kind of how I've been thinking of him, and you're kind of grouping him in more with the, like, ostensibly, like, people with the political, like, a political project. Whereas in the fact that he released a self-help book that seems to be just bromides, it's kind of like, well, he's just saying, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's the internal message in American life.
Yeah, you know, so Peterson, well, first I want to go back to something you said. I think it's true that most people, even people who sort of veer into reactionary politics, don't become Nazis. Like, they don't necessarily become white supremacists. At the same time, you know, I think that there's a way in which if you have certain beliefs at the outset, you go into the internet, you read people have the similar views, you start going into forums, you are pulled right. And some people do go all the way, to the alt-right side. But I think the larger pool of people is people who are pulled into even more reactionary politics, broadly speaking. And I think that's part of what Peterson, that's sort of, I think, that's where his supporters are coming from, right? Like the people who've dipped into further right cultural politics for whatever reason online. They find Jordan Peterson, they hear about him, start watching his videos, they buy his book, and he's part of that pulling of people who are already sort of anti-political correctness even further. I mean, he definitely wouldn't say himself that he's part of a political project, but I mean, he spends most of his time talking about things like, how trans pronouns are nonsensical. There's this interview he did with Vice. That's what made it, was that. Yeah, that's what brought him to prominence. There was this video interview he did with Vice where he was talking about the Me Too movement. He argued that it's not clear whether men and women can work in the workplace at all because there are inherent tensions that are going to arise between the genders that are inherently exacerbated by things like wearing makeup. So he's a figure in the culture wars on the right. I think it's a mistake though to see him and the people who've flocked to him as like a totally new phenomenon. There have always been young men who are more reactionary than their peers, right? There have always been young men who don't want to go down the road cultural liberalism is sort of pulling people down. The difference is that those people didn't always have the internet, right? And people like Jordan Peterson who would want to speak to those people didn't always have the channels that the internet provides to reach people. If in 1960, I'm sure there were even more young men, willing to follow a figure like this. But he wouldn't have been on like the 3 channels available or like in the major newspapers. Those young men wouldn't necessarily have a community that they could go to and bounce ideas off of and commiserate with and be angry with. What's changed really is I think the opportunity the internet provides people like Peterson. I mean, who's just, I think, frankly, after he came to prominence with the trans pronouns stuff he was saying on Canadian television, people just started watching his lectures on YouTube, and they're all there, and that's what's different. I don't really think that this is sort of a new force emerging, so much as I think that already existing currents in American politics and American life are being congealed by technology in a way that they wouldn't have been before, and that's going to make, I think, this new cultural right pretty durable as a culture, or as a subculture in American politics.
Do you think there's people out there who see Kanye embracing Trump and are like, maybe I should give this Trump guy a second look?
No. Those people don't exist. Okay. And I generally think, I'm pretty solidly pro-identity politics and the campus left, which is something that has brought me into a lot of heated arguments with people. I do think, though, that the conversations that are being had now about exposure to different ideas or endorsements of different controversial figures, I don't think that stuff really converts people. I don't think there's a constituency of people who go into a lecture by Charles Murray and come out thinking exactly what he does if they didn't before. Likewise, I don't think that people who see Kanye West endorsing Donald Trump are going to be like, Trump's my guy, if they weren't already ambivalent about Trump or Trump curious, So I don't think that he's really pushing people to the right. I think that the fans of his who I've read on Reddit and places are just kind of disappointed But there are also stands who just say, Kanye's always been a free thinker. He's always pushed the envelope. He's just doing his thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm now a Republican, but people should just lay off him and realize that this is what he does. But yeah, I don't think that there's going to be a bump in Trump's poll numbers among Kanye West's key constituency as a result of this. No.
So you mentioned that you thought that Kanye learned about Candace Owens because there was a protest of a talk she was giving at UCLA. Do you think that the campus left should shift its tactics in terms of protesting speakers like Charles Murray or Jordan Peterson if he's doing like a book tour or whatever? Because it seems to me that this is like a self-defeating strategy.
Yeah, I think the tactical conversation and sort of like the moral conversation are two different things. I've been pretty ambivalent about how tactically wise it is to shut speakers down or protest during these events. I think that there's an argument to be made that this brings attention to people who would not otherwise have it. I definitely defend the right of people to engage in that kind of protest if they want to or they feel like it's important. Tactically, I'm not really sure it makes sense. But I don't know. I don't really think. I mean, I was in college not too long ago, right? Like, I was not an activist. I was not the kind of person who would yell and picket and hold signs, whatever. So I guess dispositionally, I'm not really inclined to say that, yeah, this is affirmatively a good strategy. But I think the campus left is going to do what it's going to do, and people are going to freak out about it much more than they should.
I agree with that.
And evade certain important questions about pedagogy and speech. I think that it hasn't necessarily hurt the cause of the campus left. Like, Pew just came out with a series of polls or poll results about American belief in certain different values and the extent to which certain attitudes hold within the electorate. It's this big survey that they do, I guess, every year. And the number of Democrats who believe that it's important to keep in mind how offensive you're being when you say something, or to take into account the potential that you might offend somebody with your speech has grown. Nothing else has changed, really, in the electorate in belief about whether you should sort of self-censor or think about how what you're saying has affected people, except Democrats are more likely to say, yeah, you should be more careful in what you are saying. So there's not really evidence, as far as I can see, that what the campus left is doing has actually has been counterproductive in the way that I think people casually say it's been counterproductive. If anything, it seems like what they've been doing has shifted Democrats and people who are already liberal into being a little bit more politically correct than they would otherwise. So I don't know. The tactical conversation is complicated and interesting. I don't think the broader speech conversation we've been having has been very smart on certain points, but I think the tactics of this are debatable, but you can sort of argue either way on that front.
Yeah, I just think that there's a certain brand of conservative, public figure who
thrives on the attention.
Yeah, it's the Ann Coulter thing. Why does anyone pay attention to her? Because she says something outrageous, and then everyone gets freaked out. Why are we talking about Charles Murray? He hasn't written a book in like 5 years. No one cares about him. It's because some students at Columbia or whatever, wrote him out on a rail. So Charles Murray wins that confrontation.
Yeah, on the other hand, Milo Yiannopoulos was protested at Berkeley. Was in the press for a long time, and people said, this is something that's only going to elevate his profile. It hasn't really happened so much,
Well,
and it's not purely because of the Berkeley
kind of
protest,
self-destructed.
But I think what the Berkeley protests did, right, is they lavished a bit more attention than Milo would have otherwise had, and that I think made it more likely that people would discover these comments that he'd made about pedophilia or about child sex abuse. The Berkeley thing elevated his profile in a way that I think ultimately led to his downfall, if that makes sense. So, it's a complicated conversation, but I definitely don't think it's always true that protesting elevates the profile of certain people. I think it's a complex thing. It depends on the person, it depends on the context, depends on where protests are happening, where they're trying to speak, and what other channels they have. It's all complicated, So I don't know. But I wish that we'd have more of a conversation about, if we're going to talk about these protests, I wish we'd have a better hashing out of tactics rather than this sort of broad admonition based on ideas about speech that I don't think are very well fleshed out amongst people who sort of knee-jerk or reflexively criticize protests when they happen. I wish we could have a sort of debate about whether what happened at Berkeley was good or bad tactically for the left, because I think it's a more complicated conversation than people have been inclined to have over the past couple of years.
As long as we're talking about campus protests and controversial conservatives coming to campus, I want to plug a piece that I wrote about something that happened during my college years at Yale, where Daniel Pipes, who's a neoconservative, very anti-Muslim extremist, I guess would be the neutral way to say it, scholar came to campus, and there was a protest. This is kind of before the no platform days. The protest was people in the audience stood up and put cloth across their mouths to symbolize that they had been silenced. And they held up signs, but they didn't interrupt his speech. Something else happened that made this event stand out of my memory, and that's why I wrote about it. It involves students who were then and grew into being Jamie Kirchick and Eliana Johnson, who are both prominent journalists. We'll link to that below. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to say about Kanye?
Well, I'm not a Kanye scholar by any stretch of the imagination, so I feel like there are a lot of people who would have more to say. I don't know. The other theory that I think has not been probably has not been getting as much serious consideration as it maybe should is that this is just promotion for his new album. And this is just
right. He announced that he would be
exactly
releasing an album and producing an album with another
several
artist.
albums. He's having he said he's going to put something out with Pusha T. He has a lot of different projects in the works now, and it just happens that this controversy is blowing up now, about a month or so before some of that stuff gets released. So, maybe he's cannier than people are thinking, and this is just a big publicity stunt. I don't know. People who know Kanye better than I do would probably have more to say about that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Canny Kanye. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is a great album. I don't know a lot about hip hop, but I love that album. So he's not like a moron like Trump is. Like, he has talent and he has skill, and he is like a great artist.
Maybe he is a moron. I don't know. Like, it's you can be a moron about certain things and a genius. That's
true.
Creativity.
Trump is a moron about most things, but is a genius about marketing and branding.
Yes, exactly. So he continues multitudes, Kanye. I do know that whatever happens, I'll be listening to the album with great interest.
I'll check it out if it's streaming. I don't know if I want to support him financially directly at this point. So, Osita, thanks so much for coming on Blogging Heads. If people are interested in your work, where can they find more about it?
Sure. So I write at Slate. I think we just put up a new search bar in our new beautiful redesign. So you can just search my name. My work will probably come up on an author page. You can follow me on Twitter. It's just my first name and last name, no space between the two. And I'm too active there. So you'll be hearing a lot from me on social media.
Cool. Thanks to all of our listeners and viewers. You could subscribe to this show on iTunes, or you can subscribe on YouTube. There's lots of different ways you can consume this content. So we'll see you again next time.
Thanks for having me.